Hello, good evening. My name is Christian Dragnev and I am the president of Seratos Consulting. I'm here tonight to try to help you out and leverage the current quality management system that you have in place to actually mitigate risks associated with data and information in a more consistent and effective fashion. The goal of tonight's presentation is really to identify the elements that are already related to or implemented throughout a quality management system that can be mapped out into particular security controls, that are defined and identified through a particular standard, such, for example, the ISO 27001. So, in other words, the main goal here is really to try to understand how you can approach the implementation of information security controls from the quality standpoint. So, in order to do so, we will be talking about the role of quality management organization and the quality management professionals within their ecosystem. We will talk about the information security and its role in the operational context and how they linked together. And then we will talk about how we can integrate the security and the security controls into existing quality management system frameworks. Now, at the end, we will be talking a bit about next steps, what you need to do to achieve that. And, if you really need to get more information on it, I will be available throughout the panels, and you can always reach us out, and we will be gladly discussing more if required. So, the traditional role of quality professional was that of a reliable partner for both the operational teams, the executive stakeholders, the clients, the suppliers, and quality managers and quality professionals have been involved in all the aspects of the operation, and that was true, in the last decades. However, lately, the complexity has changed, and the role that quality managers and quality professionals that we've seen they're taking more and more is that of a trusted advisor. So what do I mean by that? It's really the fact that the quality professionals are the ones that are getting involved right now into the evaluation of risks and opportunities. They do they do have a lot of important inputs into the way the actual business operates, and it makes choices. So that being said, the quality teams, they get more and more involved in supporting the business and the enterprise at the enterprise level. One of the key roles that quality professionals and quality managers are taking, looking at the enterprise risk aspects, is the fact that they are trying to provide valuable inputs for the executive teams to make decisions with respect to organizational risk. And when we're talking organizational risk, really we're talking about all four aspects of organizational risk that are managed usually in organization. We're talking strategic risk, we're talking financial risk, we're talking hazard, and of course we're talking the operational risk, which really arises from the day-to-day operational activities. And it's really related to the competency of resources, the everything that has to do with the success or failure of the processes or people or systems and controls that are involved into the daily operation. One of the elements that's really related to that, it's really the information technology. And before, the information technology might not have been something that we were very much involved with as quality as quality engineers or quality professionals in a normal business operation. But right now, this has changed. We know that operational risks typically arise from people or failure in processes and systems and controls, including the information technology, as I said before. But how do we gauge the operational risk by its source? Traditionally, we're looking at infrastructure, equipment, and raw materials as being the major elements of exposure, to that will bring operational risks into play. However, the reality is that there is another cushion on top of the infrastructure, equipment, and raw materials, which is really the process and technology that we are looking at right now, and it's a major element of exposure to the operational risk that's being brought in by the process and technology. And but in reality, people are one of the most important elements associated with operational risk. They are the ones that are responsible to bring the value to the organization, but they bring the most of the liability associated with it. And all of these elements, they work with one single huge element of exposure, which is the actual information and the data that's being generated, transferred, stored within those elements that are creating the value of an organization. So we see how much information impacts the current operating environment, and we're looking at all these exposure elements that we were talking about, where information is actually the most encompassing one. Now, how much it costs, and at the global scale, anything that has to do with the data breach costs, right? As you can see, there are a couple of elements that I think they're very, very, very important to keep in mind. When you look at the impact per record associated with the data breaches, and one of the things that I think it comes to you realize when you look at that is that the categories themselves, the unauthorized access, disruption, and mishandling, they're fairly close to each other in average. They also tend to normalize on a global scale, which is something very interesting. You would think that, for example, unauthorized access and breaches associated with them, they will have a higher price tag, but the reality is that they all kind of tend to normalize at the global scale. And there's another interesting and frightening element to it: the fact that the average tends to increase every year. So we've looked at the most important aspects associated with operational risks associated with information, and we looked at we looked at their exposure, and we looked at the previous slide. We were talking about the costs of operational risk deriving from information. But why is it important to understand to really understand the information risks? It is because they actually impact directly your business, and all the organizational assets, they will be affected somehow by the quality of the information in itself and the way it's being handled and who has access to it, and so on and so forth. As you can see, the way we're judging information risks it's really related to the qualitative elements with which we are actually evaluating the information, which is the integrity of information, the availability of information, the confidentiality in information. There are other aspects that you can look into, but these are the main aspects that you wanna consider when you evaluate the operational risks. Now, of course, majority of people are going to be perceiving information related to risk as being related to confidentiality, breach of confidentiality and disclosure. But the reality is that when information is affected, there are other critical elements of the business that are being affected, right? So when integrity, for example, when you do a lot of rework and the information is not accurate and people are duplicating their work, at that point, obviously, there's a loss of margin. Same thing that happens when you have delays generated by the missing information or not having it at the right time in the right spot. And in that particular situation, you will experience a loss of revenue. Now, the most important element here in terms of risk, it's very interesting, but it's really related to compliance. And what does that mean? It means that one of the most prevalent risks associated with information is the risk of non-compliance, where you do have a particular set of requirements where the organization has to abide to, and those particular requirements, they do have very clear penalties, or they have clear losses associated with them, right? Usually compliance, implemented within the processes, the procedures, and the way we're doing business brings quality. In a procedural and documented approach, this is what we expect. We are complying with a particular set of rules, we will have a particular set of outcome. Information risks, they bring a different dimension to it. In that the non-compliance is really the non-compliance with requirements associated with the protection of information itself. They will affect directly your operation by contractual agreements, SLAs, or any other elements in protection of data, and in a way that might be extremely damaging to the organization. So that there is a particular cost of non-compliance that the organization, and generally they are aware of it, and they're trying to mitigate that as much as possible. How would they do that? So the question is, and everybody, this is an open question for many organizations, and at the executive level, about the cost of non-compliance. Is there anything you can do to actually control the cost of non-compliance? And, because you look at the consequences, the legal, the liability, the actual loss of market share, the margin, the revenue, right? There is a tendency to think, yeah, the cost of non-compliance can be controlled. Well, the reality is that the cost of non-compliance cannot really be controlled. So we are looking more likely at the ways to optimize the cost of compliance rather than controlling the cost of non-compliance. And it's very important to understand that. The cost of non-compliance will increase with the cost of doing business and with the size of the business that we are talking about. The cost of compliance can be optimized. You can have a particular way to look at, to implement control strategies through different and various ways to actually implement, requirements frameworks and optimization frameworks that will allow you to make sure that, compliance as a method, it's actually utilized by the organization in their advantage, and not necessarily as a deterrent for growth, which is really something that no organization would really want to have. So in the last 15 years, I implemented and audited various systems in various industries, and I can always say, that the implementing an information security management system is way more effective if the organization approaches it from the quality perspective, because it's simple. Quality professionals are aware of the process approach. They understand methods very well, and they do know what continual improvement is. So I think the natural way to actually implement an information security management system and to protect your data and make sure that the core elements of the information are actually, taken care of in the best way, is really to start from the quality management system perspective. And that is a reality, and I always advise that, in order to protect your own data and information, you really need to understand what does that mean from the quality perspective. There are several ways to do that, and one of the things that is important to keep in mind, the most frequent approach, the most prevalent approach to implement information security at this point is really by implementing information security controls. So the organizations will identify a number of controls. They will say whatever they think it's good for them, and they will start implementing those, and then they will validate them, and they will have this controls driven approach in implementing information security. And that is not bad. It's a way of doing it. But if you move from that granular level of trying to identify all the risks, all the threats, and put all the controls in place, which is really not something that is extremely doable, to an approach where you're actually looking more from the management system perspective, then you will realize that implementing actually an information security framework, it's way more effective, to start with. Such a framework of requirements would be the 2701 2013 standard, which really specifies, the how an organization should establish, maintain, and improve their information security in an existing process approach context. There are particular requirements associated with asset with risk assessment, risk treatment, and my colleagues in the panel, I'm sure they spoke about that before, and it's based on the HLS, the high level structure that has been put forward by the ISO to add to it certain elements that are very specific to information security. These elements, as you can see here, are really very, very interesting and very, very similar to the ones that we see in the ISO 9001. And we do have the depiction that you see here. It's really identifying the elements that are common, the ones where, there are specific there are specific requirements to the ISMS, to the Information Security Management System or the Quality Management System. They're either QMS or ISMS. So the high-level structure really follows the same plan as you see in ISO 9001 in the Quality Management System, and it has certain add-ons that you need to take into consideration if you want to certify your system. What we're gonna try doing today, it's really to identify the areas that are more related to the prescriptive side of the ISO 27001. So what do you mean by what do we mean by the prescriptive side of ISO 27001? Well, the standard is utilizing an annex to lay out the controls and then the categories of the controls that they consider to be comprehensive in implementing an information security management system that is effective in any domain. There are 14 security categories and 114 specific controls that the standard is looking for. And some of them, they are extremely detailed in terms of what needs to be implemented, what the expectation is in terms of the requirements. Others are a bit more generic, but nevertheless, they need to be all considered the moment you start implementing the standard. So what we are going to do is really there are two aspects here. One of them is really there are two aspects in leveraging the ISO 9001, the QMS implementation. One is really looking at the management clauses and making sure that all the management functions, they're aligned with the requirements of the 2701. But the other aspect is when you already implemented the 9001 and you do have an operational system in place, there are certain controls and there are certain areas of the ISO 9001 that are already in a good position to be utilized when taking into consideration the requirements of the ISO 27001. So we will concentrate, in the next couple of minutes on those particular areas. So there are going to be 6 areas of focus that we're gonna look into, associated with the ISO 9001, where we can actually identify controls that have been implemented, they're already in place, that can be leveraged to the implementation of the ISO 2701. There, the mapping that we have created has been tailored to this particular presentation. Obviously, we can definitely go more deeper, and we can have a different perspective based upon the industry, based upon the type of the organization, the product or the service that the organization offers. But in a nutshell, what we're going to try doing is really to identify or to help you out when you start your information security implementation, to look into the areas that you already have in place, based on the quality management system that has been implemented, and take those into account when you try to develop and put in place information security controls that are aligned with the requirements of the ISO 2701. And those elements are related to 7.1 resources. We will talk about the operational planning and control, and we will talk about the requirements, design, control of external processes, and production and service provisioning. These are the areas that we're going to be looking into. They're mostly under support and under operation. So as I said, we will start the mapping of the support and operation clauses that you generally see in a QMS implementation to particular ISO 2701 Annex control, based on a generic view of the QMS and also a generic view of the ISO 2701. I will try to provide you with a bit more detail when it's possible, being also mindful of your time. But nevertheless, if you look for more information, you can always find me, and we can discuss, and I can provide you with a better, a more detailed view of this mapping. When starting to implement, to try to secure your data and information that is already in place and you utilizing throughout the quality management system, you already start with the scope of the quality management system, which usually it really consists of all the most important operational processes that are created around your products or your services. That's the way the QMS works. You need to identify, the product, the service, and look at the operational processes that will help you create and deliver that product and service, and also implement the controls of the quality controls associated with and related to the ISO 29001 standard. Now, that is the way that the ISO 9001 works. Now, the way we implementing the ISO 2701, can take into consideration different types of, a different type of carving of that particular scope. So when you look at the scope of the information security, there are 2 types of situations that you're going to be looking into. One of them, it's really when your organization is, responsible to create and develop information security related products or services, where your operation is really related to information security in a way, shape or form. So in other words, your organization is responsible to build software, that is, utilizing as an antivirus. Your organization creates products like that are part of a surveillance system, or you do a badge access control system, or your services are related to network monitoring, or you do backups. So when that is the case, the scope of the information security management system will include the operation of the organization. If you already have in place a quality management system around those products and services, most likely your information security management system will include everything. Will include the actual operation as well as the supporting services, right? So that's an important distinction that you may see in the implementation of this of the information security management system. The other situation is where your products or services are not really related to the information security. They're not, they don't deliver anything related to information security. However, we are concerned about the data or the information that your products or services are handling, right? So in that particular situation, the scope of information security might be tailored to the way we are implementing the controls. For example, we are just going to be limiting our information security management system scope to the information technology services, to the information security services, to the infrastructure. So we might have a situation like that. And when the quality management system is really related to your product. So it might be in that particular situation, you have to make sure that you understand what constitutes the scope of your ISMS. So therefore, you will be able to leverage certain parts of the QMS into the information security management system. However, regardless of the type of the organization you are, whether you actually build services and products associated with information security, or you just a regular organization that actually handles confidential information or sensitive information throughout its operational life cycle without necessarily selling services in the information security space, but you have implemented your quality management system at that point, at the beginning, you do have an obligation to implement and provide infrastructure that is necessary for the operational processes of your organization. That will include, buildings and utilities, equipment, hardware, software, information and communication technology, and definitely you need to provide the operational environment that is appropriate for the type of business that you are. Now, when you did that throughout the implementation and the operation of the QMS, you actually have already touched on some of the requirements, and you responded to some of the requirements that you will find identified in the ISO 27001. So for example, the need to control physical access to the facility, security and around the premises, the fact that you need to control the loading docks. That is, part of any plans that have been developed around that, and how do you actually control physical access, any procedures, any systems that you put in place. They're also considered controls for information security. Same thing with the maintenance plans and maintenance schedule that have been created to maintain your facilities, your infrastructure. Anything related to power and space, capacity management associated with your equipment, with your power equipment, for example. All of them, they are part of the requirements of the ISO 27001. Depending if you own or lease your facilities, you do have agreements and standard in place for to operate, and all of them, they include clauses associated with how to protect the operation itself, and subsequently the information that it actually, it's part of the operation. Other elements that you want to be looking into would be the service redundancy, the maintenance services that you have contracted, anything related to the way you operate your actual assets, right? Inventory of assets, and the identification of suppliers themselves. Any of those, they will become, they can become part of your information security infrastructure. It's very interesting because you do in terms of the way you're looking at the physical environment, right? There are elements associated with location security, right, under the 714. And for example, you do have situations where we're already embedded into the way you're doing business. There are clear desk and clear screen elements associated with the way the layout of the offices is. Anything that has been done with regards to that under the quality management system, under the section 713 and 714, can be successfully utilized within the ISO 27001. If when implementing the quality management system, you are in a position to determine and implement resources specific to monitoring and measuring, and verify the conformity of your product and services, at that point you have put in place obviously elements associated with the measuring equipment or anything that has to do with measurement standards. If that is the case, you can definitely leverage some of the elements that have been already implemented. So for example, anything that has to do with logging and monitoring of the logs themselves, any protection of the logging facilities themselves, that might be also something that you want to be looking into. The control of operational software, that is used for the measurement and monitoring. If you do that, all these elements that you have put in place, any procedures, any work instructions, or any type of activities that you have put in place to make sure that happens, and along with the fact that you might be putting in place controls to protect your records, anything that has to do with protecting the measurements themselves, and any of the actual calibration elements that you begin looking into, that have to be protected. At that point, all the controls that you already put in place, they might be used depending on the scope of your system into as information security controls, and subsequently utilized within the 27001. One interesting area that is related to the implementation of resources under the ISO 9001, the QMS, is related to organizational knowledge, right? The organization needs to aggregate the information that is relevant for the operation, and at that point, you need to make sure that type of knowledge, it's available and it's accurate and can be used for the organization to improve their products and services. From the ISO 27001 perspective, so as an information security control, the aggregated information that has strategic value, which is the knowledge, can be there are several elements that, if you already put in place, they can be also utilized successfully in the implementation of as information security controls. And I'm looking here at anything that has to do with confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements. All the agreements that you have put in place to control the outsourced development. The fact that you do have provisions for protecting the intellectual property rights, or again, protection of the records themselves. All these elements, they constitute, they're part of the information security framework, and they all can be mapped out into specific information security requirements associated with the 27001 standard. In the situations where we are talking about an information security scope that includes particular products and services for which in which you actually have to implement or embed information security controls. If you look at the section 8 of the standard associated with requirements and customer communication, under customer communication and requirements for product and services, as a quality organization, when you're looking at those elements, you have put in place anything, you have put in place mechanism to handling the customer communication, to make sure that the customer feedback is being obtained. You're looking at the way you're handling and controlling customer property within the agreements. And obviously you do have a mechanism in place to identify requirements and, to make sure that you understand, what the products and services they have to look like to satisfy the customer or your clients. Now, when you have put in place those provisions, when you have implemented those elements under the requirements of the ISO 9001, obviously there are certain elements within that can be also mapped into the way we are actually protecting information, and subsequently to connect them into the ISO 27001 framework. So for example, anything that, the information, anything that falls under the provision of the contractual agreements and the way we're doing the information transfer between the client and the organization. And if you do have formal policies and procedures in place to make sure that the exchange of information is done in an accurate manner. And at that point, we do have particular parts of the ISO 27001 that will definitely respond to or require us to do so. So another element that you want to be looking into when talking about the customer communication, it's also the fact that almost all the organizations at this point, and they will utilize email and messaging, and anything that has to do with organizing and managing email and messaging in itself, it's part, it has to be controlled in a certain way, and has to be controlled in a certain way will be part and can be part of satisfying requirements of the ISO 27001. Specifically, we're talking about the A13 section that is very specific to electronic messaging. So if you already have in place, electronic messaging, and you do have procedures, and you do have acceptable use policies in place where you actually determine how the clients will communicate, or how your employees will communicate with the clients, what are the standards that you're going to be using, what can be disclosed, what cannot be disclosed throughout the communication. If that is the case, these documents and these procedures, they will constitute a very good basis for the implementation of the 27001 requirements under the section 13, for example. Another important element of the quality management system and the way we operate in the requirement, and then we manage requirements under the provision of section 8 of the standard, is really to ensure that relevant documented information is created and maintained, to make sure that the changes associated with requirements are captured and managed in an effective manner, right? So if we are in a situation where the products and services associated with the scope of the security systems are related to they're part of our development and production life cycle, right? Where we actually looking for requirements, we embedded them into the products and services, we verify, we validate, and then we're able to deliver them to the clients. If that is the case, specific information security requirements would have to be also embedded into this process. And the methods that we put in place already to ensure that the quality of our products is maintained throughout the production and development life cycle, then at that point we already have in place several elements that will allow us to claim conformity and make sure that we do have specific security requirements in place to protect the data in those particular situations, right? So we're really talking about any change management process that's associated with development. And if you do already use the change advisory boards, right, for particular changes in the configuration. There's a lot of there are a lot of situations where, you know, everything right now it's used as a service, right? So you do have configuration as a service, and you have software as a service, you have infrastructure as a service. Any changes to those infrastructure, to those elements, you know, that are captured in one way or another, they might be subject to, you know, they might be in a position to be utilized, you know, as information security controls. So it is important to understand that those situations, when this arrives, right, at that point, we are going to be in a position to claim conformity with the standard based on those provisions. A core element of operation under the provision of the ISO 9001 Section 8 is, you know, how we design and develop products and services, the requirements associated with design and development of products and services. The organizations that or implement the ISO 9001 or quality management system that's operational, usually they have designed product or service development life cycles. They documented their methods and methodologies to create the products. And when they develop those methodologies, if information security requirements have been already included in the design and development of the products, that at that particular point we are able to you know, kind of mix together the ISO 2701 with ISO 9001 in terms of looking at the requirements, you know, from the looking at information security requirements from the quality angle. So there are particular provisions in that we are looking into and specific to security and development and support processes. If you do have created a development policy, you know, probably associated with it, you do have a security elements associated with security in the development policy itself. These are already, you know, requirements of the 2701 standard. Same thing with the system change control procedures that we were discussing before. If that is part of the life cycle, then at that point you're going to be able to reutilize those elements into claiming conformity with the requirements of the ISO 27001. Any other activities associated with the way we're looking at the design and development inputs and outputs, and also the changes in the development process, they can be also mapped to particular requirements associated with the technical review of applications, with the changes of the systems itself, and they're generally all under the umbrella of secure system engineering principles, right? Which if we already have a methodology in place, it can be most likely be aligned with the requirements of the ISO 27001. While we're developing products and services under the provision of the Section 8 of the quality management system, if we have implemented controls, quality controls, and operational controls associated with our development and delivery, one of the elements that we're looking into is really to ensure that the externally provided processes, you know, they will conform with the requirements. And we need to determine the type and extent of the control, as well as the information related to external providers. These elements are, you know, you can look at them from the quality perspective, and it's obviously for the quality professionals why those requirements are in place. It's really to make sure that if we are outsourcing elements of our system to be executed in a different environment, we want to make sure that we understand what is the impact of that particular area to our product or service. Now, if you think like that, but you switch and you look from the security perspective, obviously, if that is the case, if we are in situations that are specific, where we actually having to control externally provided processes or products or services, obviously, if information is part of that, we do have critical information that's part of that externally provided processes, products and services. At that point, we do have to put in place controls that will ensure that the information is accurate, it's secure, and it's available at the appropriate time. If that is already something that we do under the provision of the ISO 9001, we do have specific requirements that will allow us to, that we do have specific requirements in the ISO 27001 where that we can actually map to that. So those requirements are really related to supplier relationships and the way we're managing risk for suppliers, specifically for the information security. And also there's another provision related to the way we control outsourced development from the information security standpoint. So again, there's similarities between the way we're controlling the externally provided processes, products and services under the quality management, and the way those elements are looked at from the information security perspective. Again, something that you can easily use or to start using, and then align and make sure that they're accurately utilized within both systems. One other element that is very important in the operation is really the production and service provision, and it's really how we control production and service provision in order to ensure quality. The identification and traceability, when it's a requirement, it allows us to make sure that we following particular items and particular elements that are critical to our products and services throughout the product or the service lifecycle. And again, if we're looking at it from the informational perspective, right, all these elements that are part of the production and service provisioning, they are, all the informational elements that are associated with production and service provisioning can be looked at from the information security perspective. So we're looking to make sure that all these parts are actually traced and maintained in an accurate manner. We want to make sure that the production and service provision under the controlled conditions, it's executed in an accurate manner as well. And if there are any particular requirements associated with confidentiality, user access, or anything that is related to accessing those services, and be able to ensure that the control conditions, for example, are accurate or maintained, then at that point there are particular requirements in the ISO 9001 that can be directly mapped into what we call information security controls under operational procedures, logging and monitoring, and obviously the change management requirements of the standard. Last but not least, one of the elements that you will see as being extremely important in certain quality management system, it's really the way we're handling property that belongs to the customers or external providers. So the organization shall exercise care with property belonging to customer or external providers. Under the notion of care, we can look very easily and say, well, if the notion of care includes confidentiality, if the notion of care includes availability, if the notion of care includes accuracy, then at that point, all these elements and the way we respond to them in the ISO 9001 in our quality management system, they can be, they can be summarized, or they can be interpreted as being related to information security. Now, there are other provisions that probably they need to be added to them in order for them to really become information security controls, but the basis of that is really already the basis of protecting that type of data, customer the property belonging to customer itself, or if that property is actually information, right? At that point, you do have a lot of elements that can be already mapped into the requirements of the ISO 27001. So we looked at the parts of the section 7 and 8 of the ISO 9001, how they are going to be implemented in a regular, in a normal quality management system, and what the provisions are and how they can be mapped into the requirements of the ISO 27001 and what sections. And I gave you a bit of information of what type of deliverables you should be looking there, you should be looking for, that have been already created, that you can actually leverage. As we were saying, majority of the controls from the ISO 9001 can be mapped to a certain degree into the ISO 2701 standard. There are several elements that are extremely specific, like the encryption, or specific elements associated with business continuity management that might not necessarily be as easy to identify as the majority of them. But nevertheless, that would be an exercise that it can be done by within the context of the documentation that's already in place within particular functions that the organization has put in place to ensure redundancy, for example. That will definitely help in creating those additional controls. What are the next steps? So the most important element when you try to leverage the ISO 9001 in implementing a information security framework, requirements framework, it's really to identify the relevant data that is impacting your operation that you're trying to protect. You need to identify the areas of your operations or your infrastructure and your support functions that are part of the information flow that is considered critical for your business. And you really need at that point to identify the operational risks that are relevant for you, and you need to evaluate them in a way that will allow you to provide actionable treatment for those particular risks, and also identify what are the actual controls that you want to put in place, right? One element that's very important is really to determine the most appropriate operational scope for your information security. And what do you need to put in place to secure the data? That's very important, but it's also very important to determine what are the functions that you're trying to protect from your organization. And that is very important when there's a distinction between, because there's a distinction between the organizations, as I said, the organizations that are creating products and services specifically designed to operate in an information security context. That's their business. And then there are other operations that are just gonna utilize the data in a certain way that makes it more exposed to information security threats. So you have to actually act upon those threats and provide mitigation there. Another very important element, right after you're done and you identify the actual scope that it's important for your organization in terms of information security, it's really to determine what are the key stakeholders and the risk owners associated with your information security management system. And then absolutely you need to leverage the quality management system infrastructure, both in terms of the high level structure, both in terms of the management clauses of the quality management system, where I'm really talking about anything that has to do with documentation, internal audits, management review, the corrective action process, and so on and so forth, which really will constitute your quality management system that can be also leveraged to create your information security management system and respond to management clauses of the ISO 2701. But more importantly, on the operational side, you really need to identify the controls that are the most the most aligned with the requirements of the ISO 27001 standard. So like that, you will be able to create, to respond to the management parts of the standards, but also to the prescriptive side of the standard itself. And then obviously there are advantages of creating an integrated management system. And at that point, you can definitely leverage elements that are very, very important in the certification cycle. Like, for example, having combined audits, being able to utilize the same type of auditor, the same auditors to perform both certifications. There are many advantages that are coming from that. Hopefully, you're going to be able and be in a position to sometimes leverage that and take advantage of it. So I hope my presentation provided you with a bit of an insight in the way you want to leverage. You want to leverage your quality management system to protect the data and the information that is critical for your business. And with the help of the ISO 27001 standard, which will provide you a very thorough and very comprehensive information security requirements framework. Obviously, you're going to be able, you can put yourself in a situation to increase and improve the information security posture and quality of the products and services that your organization provides. So don't hesitate to contact us to find out more, and let me know if you do have any particular questions. I will be part of the panel, and I'm looking forward to talk to you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the evening.